All right, I promised another special spooky episode, and I didn't actually have time to drop this on Halloween because I had a business trip on Monday and was already behind on the previous episode. But I think it kind of worked out better this way. So, let's jump into Insect Horror Stories number 2. I had to scour the net for some of these, and this first one is quite an interesting tale. Some homeowners were minding their own business, doing what homeowners do, which I certainly don't know, but I imagine it's adulting at its finest. Anyway, these folks were seeing a few bees flying around their home, and at first they didn't think anything of it. It's just a couple bees, but what they found odd was that the bees just never seemed to go away. Now, it got to the point where these people decided they should actually get someone to investigate. Because having bees around your house all the time is not normal. And boy oh boy, their house had something quite abnormal. You see, the bee removal team pulled out a 6-foot honeycomb from their living room ceiling. I just don't understand how they never heard any of it. And the thing is, it had to have been there for at least 2 years, with the owners living in the home for 9. There were literally over 120,000 bees buzzing away in the living room, completely unnoticed. A news crew even came and stated that the scene looked like something out of Dexter. Now, if you thought that one was bad, get a load of this next story. A blind woman living in Gulfport, Florida, went to the doctors complaining of a rash all over her body. The doctor looked her over and claimed that this was not a case of eczema. In fact, it wasn't even bed bugs. So what happened? They got an exterminator on the case, and they had to break the news to this poor woman that she was sleeping on a nest of fire ants. I can't even imagine the pain, but this is where it gets really interesting. This woman didn't feel a thing. She had been prescribed painkillers for a separate medical issue and only noticed the rash through touch. Now, this isn't the first time I've heard stories of elderly people having unwanted visitors, though. I actually saw a video where this older woman was asking her granddaughter for help because she felt like there was something in her ear. And a little bit of peroxide later revealed a spider had just been chilling in there. Yikes. Alright, here's a story from a person living in Maui, which is one of the more popular islands in the state of Hawaii. Here it goes. I first need to preface this story that bugs in tropical climates are a whole other thing. They're like something from a prehistoric era, huge and prevalent. I was asleep, in my bed at my mom's place, when I woke up to something crawling on my face. Still half asleep and thinking it was my own hair, I brushed it off. But then I felt it again, and this time I was fully awake. I brushed the hair again, but then I heard something hit the pillow. It was a 6-inch long centipede. Okay, so I've lived in Hawaii and been to Maui, and those centipedes are no joke. They're a venomous Malaysian kind that kill geckos, mice, and even birds. The bite is so painful it usually results in a visit to the emergency room. And one of my colleagues actually got woken up in the middle of the night to find one in her shirt. And she got bit while she was sleeping. Here's another good one. It's called The Mystery of a Clogged Drain. I once noticed my shower drain was clogged and I went to clean it out with what I assumed would be standard gunk/hair buildup. Now instead, dozens and dozens of live cockroaches came pouring out. It was like a scene from The Mummy. I ran out of the room, blocked up the door, and immediately called for backup. I now recreate that scene with fake cockroaches every year for Halloween, and it's so awful, most of my guests scream when they walk into the bathroom. This one reminds me of another story I read about an army of roaches coming out of a kitchen sink. I think I mentioned that one in the cockroach episode, but we're going to move on to the next story. This one's called Extended Family of Intruders. Alright, so we had been living in our newly purchased home for about 4 months. And one day, while I was taking the dog out through the back door, I noticed what looked to be like mud spots on the inside door frame and baseboards. So I turned the lights on to wipe it down, and I was wrong. It was hundreds of ants pouring out of a small gap between the baseboard and the door frame, and they all were pouring into my bedroom. It was like a sick scene from a bad horror movie. I started sucking them up into the vacuum, and they were coming out faster than I could get them. An exterminator came and said the entire back wall of our home was infested, and that when they came out like that, it's because the colony has outgrown the space they're in, and they send only about 10% of the colony to find a new home. He estimated there were probably 100,000 plus ants living in the wall. We had to have the house treated for months to finally get rid of them all. And now, every time I see an ant in the house at all, even one, I panic. Okay, this last one comes from an insect enthusiast named Megan. I raised a dead leaf mantis, Deiroplates desiccata, to adulthood. I would occasionally feed him wild-caught insects from when I went out collecting. I had collected a smaller female European mantis one night and thought that she would be a fun treat for my dead leaf mantis. He was quite a bit larger than she was. Now I know that sounds kind of sadistic, but larger mantids will eat smaller ones. Anyways, I put her in there and they just kind of avoided each other for the first day. The next day I walked in and they were really fighting. I started to get a bit worried because I realized that mine was getting kind of old. He'd been an adult for a few months now. Well, the female mantis got her raptors around his thorax and started eating his face. Now, this is not how I wanted things to go, so naturally I tried to pull them apart. But when I did that, she maintained her grip on the top half of his body and the lower half came right off. The lower half of his body ran up a branch in the enclosure and was just kind of holding on there. She continued eating his top half. It really creeped me out, so I just walked out of the room. I was pretty upset because I really liked my dead leaf mantis. Now, I wasn't surprised that this lower half of the body was still quote unquote living because males can live for a bit when they are decapitated by a female. However, from what I was reading, they're really only supposed to live for a few hours. Now, I have a few friends that are mantis keepers that I talked to, and they also said it should only live a few hours. The next morning, I looked into the enclosure, and the lower half of the body was now standing at the bottom of the enclosure. Out of morbid curiosity, I misted it with water, and the body sort of dipped down as if to try and drink it. Later in the day, I checked again and it was still there, but in a different place. I told my fiance to poke it and it scuttled away. This body was fully responsive to stimuli for 6 whole days. I took daily videos and showed the date and time in each one, just in case I ever needed proof, because this was just wild. I think it would have lived until it consumed all the energy it had left, but it ended up getting finished off by the female. I figured there was no harm in just kind of letting her live there, you know? I think the body moved and she decided to eat it, so there was only wings left when I checked on the 6th day. Now I know there are other insects that can live quite some time without a head, but this was an unusually long time for a mantis. Also, it was just flat out creepy, having just the lower half of a mantis existing as if nothing was wrong. And with that last incredible story, we come to an end on Insect Horror Stories Part 2. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you enjoyed. Next week, I've got a really interesting topic to cover, and I'm pretty excited about it.